All right, good morning everyone. Welcome back. This is part 2 of my Tesla and finances video series. In yesterday's video, I addressed what did I pay for the car, did I finance it, what did I finance it for, and all the rest. And I promised you guys that I would follow this up with a video explaining a little bit more about my business philosophy regarding owning this car. And as I said in yesterday's video, I did touch on some of these things in other videos, but I wanted to compile it in a succinct way for you guys. So again, as a recap, I have a $900 per month vehicle budget, and I mentioned that this car costs me $776 a month, and that insurance is essentially nil because of adding this into my sort of fleet policy. And then there's charging expense, but I've had people point out that it's not just the $776 a month that I put about $10,000 down in the car, and you have to amortize that over the 6-year loan duration or whatever. And I agree with that. But what I wanted to add in is there are other benefits to owning this car that offset that. So for instance, the $7,500 tax credit. As a self-employed individual, my earnings is enough that now I was barely able to take advantage of the full $7,500 tax credit, but I was able to take advantage of it. So that $7,500 right there is a benefit that offsets that $10,000 I put down in the car. Second, there's no oil changes. Now, the cost of an oil change isn't really that big a deal, but let's do the math. I put between 40 and 45,000 miles a year on a vehicle. So let's figure on the low end and call it 40,000. With a typical gas vehicle, I'd be changing the oil roughly once a month throughout the year. And oil changes are, it's about one per month, and the oil change itself has a cost. But when you're using a vehicle for business use, there's more than just the upfront cost. There's also the lost time. So let's call it 40 bucks for an oil change. So, which is about what I was paying for my C-Max hybrid. With hybrids, you pay a little bit more for an oil change for a number of reasons. There's an air shroud underneath the car that they have to remove, and I don't know, it's more cramped in there, but we'll call it $40 for an oil change. So that's $40 a month for an oil change. On top of that, it's roughly 1 hour of lost time. Now, it doesn't take an hour to have the oil changed, but by the time I pull in, get out of the car, go up to the desk, talk to them, they bring the car back, they get the car done, I have to pay, I get back in my car, I get back onto my route. It's about a lost hour. Now, my business grosses roughly $120 for every hour that I'm on the road. Now, that's not every hour we're open. I mean, we're open for business at times when I'm in the office writing service calls and that I'm not counting. But for the time spent on the road, which is the sacrificed time getting the oil changed, it's $120 an hour. So getting the oil changed is $40 for the oil change plus $120 for a lost hour of company time, which ends up being $160 per month just because of getting oil changes in a normal car for my business. And I know you may think I'm exaggerating, but trust me on this. When you run a business, it's totally different. Vehicle expense, the way you view a vehicle is completely different than personal use. With a personal car, I don't care. We'll just get the oil changed when we get it changed. My wife usually is the one that goes and does it because I'm working during normal hours when a company would be willing and able to change my oil. So she'll handle that, and she's a stay-at-home mom, so it doesn't really cost us. But for a business, with my business vehicle, I have to take away business time. So that's a factor. So you've got the $7,500 tax credit that offsets, plus the no oil changes. Now here's another one that a lot of you may not think about. And when you're driving a car for personal use, you don't really think about the time it takes to gas up a car. Now, in the last video, I mentioned the fuel savings, that I'm not fueling up this car as an electric car, I'm plugging it in. And that's very true. What I didn't point out is it's not so much just the savings in fuel expense, it's the time. Now, on average, I lose about 8 minutes when I gas up a car. Now, you guys will probably say, I've timed it, it's like 3 minutes. Well, no, I don't, but I have to take a little bit of a detour and get off the road, pull into the station, get out of the car, go to the pump, select it, gas it up, get back in the car. Usually I'm kind of situating myself for business use. I've got my clipboard there, and that it's on average about 8 minutes of lost time. Sometimes there's no gas station right on my route and I've got to sort of take a bit of a detour. It takes more time. Other times there's a station right on the way and it's less, but it's 8 minutes. Even if you figure very rapid and call it 6 minutes, I'm going to lose time every time I gas up. So gassing up cars is anywhere from 3 times a week to only once a week. With my C-Max Hybrid, it was only once a week. But with a normal gas car, it was 2 or 3 times a week. But for the sake of, let's call it the best case scenario, once a week, I was gassing the car up at 8 minutes per time. So that's 8 minutes a week. Well, that means that about every 6 weeks, I can do another service call. The gross revenues on a service call is about $150. So every 6 weeks, I'm losing $150 in lost time stopping and gassing up the car. And again, I know that sounds crazy to say, but when you're driving, you amortize this over numerous years, and it does add up. So that's another factor. And a lot of people say, well, you're nitpicking. Well, you know what? It's funny. Operating my business is interesting. I bought a screw gun because taking Phillips screws out, on average, it saves me 2 minutes per service call. 2 minutes per service call, 9 service calls a day. Well, that's 18 minutes per day. That means every 3rd or 4th day I can do another service call and make $150. If you do that enough, it really builds up. Every little thing makes a difference. I run a tiny little business. It's just me doing service calls. I don't have any employees. I don't have anyone answering my phones. I don't have anyone running service calls for me. I pay an accountant to do monthly books, quarterly books, and year-end taxes. But aside from that, I do absolutely everything else. I wear every hat for my business. Every minute of my time is valuable. So this car really helps tremendously. Now, there are certain negatives about owning this car for business. For one thing, I do carry an inventory. So I have parts that I bring along. I do appliance service. The trunk up front, what Tesla calls the frunk up front, that's got a 3 basically fabric shopping bags full of parts. Well, special tools and washing machine parts. And then the trunk on a Tesla is extra deep because of no gas tank and no muffler, so it's actually a pretty big trunk. It's completely full. I mean, completely full of stuff. And then I've got my toolbox in the back seat, and right now there's one loose box back there, and then a washing machine motor on the floor and another box on the floor. Normally there's nothing in the back seat but my toolbox, but today I have a couple extra boxes. So a hatchback would be much more convenient. This car is somewhat inconvenient for doing service work in that I have to load it a certain way, and it's not as spacious as a hatchback would be. But that's fine. The benefits outweigh the drawbacks. So some of the other benefits to using this car for business is just overall comfort. We've got the technology. Autopilot, excellent. So, I mean, you're supposed to keep your hand on the wheel, whatever, but the fact of the matter is, in autopilot, I can look over, I can grab my clipboard if I need to, I can look behind me, did I remember my toolbox, I can, whatever, and I can know that autopilot has my back. It's very nice. It takes the stress off of driving. If my cell phone rings, which I already answered one phone call during this video that I edited out, I can answer the phone, I can lay my clipboard on the armrest here, and I can, write some things down. I'm still, paying attention to the best of my ability, but without autopilot, you end up kind of wandering, if your attention is somewhat divided, or I've got to pull over to write a service call. So that's another thing. Before I got this car, doing paperwork in the car was difficult. Now, it's not like I sit there and make a bank deposit and stamp checks and all that while I'm driving, but just taking my clipboard, laying it on the armrest and writing things looking down while riding, look up, look down, look up. I mean, it was, whoa, it was hazardous. So I'd pull over. Well, pulling over, then that wastes time. 5 or 6 minutes to write a service call that I'm sitting there not driving. This car, I can do more things in the car because of autopilot. And as a sidebar, don't scream at me that you're not supposed to take your eyes off the road. It's not like I look down and never watch what's going on. There's the fact of the matter is that even without doing business in a car, you're going to glance down, you're going to look around, and autopilot really helps reduce the stress level when you're driving, because if you glance at something, you're not, whoa, I'm running on the shoulder or whatever, which has happened to me before. Thank God I've never hit a mailbox or anything else, but it's just the reality. I drive 40,000+ miles a year. Thank God I've never had an issue, but my phone rings and it startles me and whoa, whatever, and I got to grab something over here. Autopilot is wonderful because it eases that load. One of the first things I do when my cell phone rings is I turn on autopilot so that if I'm on the phone, even though it's hands-free, it's nice to know that autopilot is helping me. So autopilot is definitely worth it. Once full self-driving becomes a thing, which we are years away from that, but I'm excited for that because that brings me to a whole nother level of business savings through use of the vehicle. In fact, I've done the math, and a $100,000 car becomes worth it if the car can do all the driving and I can do absolutely all my office work, paperwork, inventorying, and everything from the vehicle while it drives. So, that I'm looking forward to in the future. But it's also one, and I'll admit this was a risk, this was a gamble on my part, but this next point is vehicle reliability. Now, this car so far, in 46,000+ miles, this has been the most reliable car I've ever owned. Now, it is definitely possible, the haters that are out there that go, well, just wait, put 100,000 on it and we'll see. That's true. It might be that at 100,000 miles, this car is going to have issues. But I got to tell you, the cars that I've had that have had issues at 100,000, you knew it long before that. They were already having problems at 20 or 30,000 miles, and you just knew it was going to prove to be an unreliable car. I've got a pretty good perception of this, too, in researching things, researching companies and build style of the vehicle and that. My C-Max Hybrid was very reliable. Electrification inherently increases reliability in a car. It just is. So this car, I'm banking on in the future that it will be far more reliable. Now, it might be expensive to service when it's in the shop, but you have to understand something. My business grosses $1,000 a day. Now, that's for a 4-day work week. So I work Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday on the road. Wednesday, I do work in my shop, and I do office work and paperwork and that. So I have a 4-day work week. The business grosses $1,000 a day. No, I don't earn $1,000 a day, but that's what the business grosses. So if my work vehicle is down 1 day in the shop, it's $1,000 loss. $1,000. Now, yes, I can have another vehicle to use. So let's say I schedule maintenance and I know I'll be without my car for 3 days. I can have another car and not lose that day. I get it. But consider this. Car breaks down, stuck on the side of the road. Now I got to get it towed, and a tow truck does not show up immediately. It's anywhere from an hour to 3 hours to get a tow truck. And trust me, I've been towed a number of times. I know. So the car breaks down. All right, well, now I have to call a tow truck, wait for the tow truck to arrive. Once the tow truck arrives, then I have to have the car towed. I have to have the car towed to wherever it's going to go. It's full of my parts, so I have to get another vehicle. I have to go empty the parts out and put it in that vehicle. I'm going to pretty much lose that day of work, or at least the majority of it. So let's call it 2/3 of a day. So like roughly $700 in lost revenue generating time just because the car broke, not even including the service time. Plus then there's time going back to pick up the car, switch the parts around, return the other vehicle I borrowed to do service work for. So that's going to bring it to a full day. So every time a vehicle breaks down, it costs the business $1,000 in lost time. So, a Ford, water pump goes bad, whatever, it's $400, $500, whatever it is to change that water pump. Okay, it's actually more like $1,500 because I've lost a day of work plus the repair. So let's say, and on average, I would lose a day of work probably every, we'll call it every 3 months, historically with other cars I've had. So about 4 times a year my car is in the shop and I lose a day of work at least getting the car serviced. So that's $4,000 a year. Or roughly, we'll figure low, we'll call it $300 a month in lost revenue because of lost time in having my car down while I'm having it serviced. With this car, it may be expensive to fix, but it's also I'm banking on it breaking less frequently, so I will have fewer of those $1,000 lost work days. So even though this car may cost more to service, it's going to break so much less frequently that I believe the additional expense in service will be offset in less lost work days. So all of those things come into play. Also, the way I view a business expense is different from the way I view a personal expense. So a personal expense with a vehicle, I look at it like, all right, this vehicle's costing me X amount to buy. I would rather pay cash for it or pay it off as soon as is humanly possible. Now with a business expense, I don't have any business debt at all. I do have a loan on the car. The car was bought through my personal name, and then I lease it back to the business, and I deduct the miles. But so it's technically an expense, a business expense. Well, I don't like having debt attached to my company, but I would rather have an amortized expense spread over a period of time that I can work into the business budget than to have the business have to save up and pay a big lump all at once to purchase a vehicle. And it's just my personal preference in the way I like to do business, but it just is easier for me to do that. So having a loan on a vehicle for business use really isn't a problem, at least not from my business philosophy standpoint. And so those are some things that I look at. Also, comfort in a car. When I was using my Chevy Astrovan and some of the beater cars I've had over the years for business, I'm behind the wheel on average about 5 hours a day, staring out the windshield. 5 to 5.5 hours a day. Well, when I'm driving an old beat up car and it's burning oil that I can smell or whatever, and the stereo doesn't work and the left turn signal, you got to hold it down, and all these little issues, and it drips oil, all these problems that these cars have, and is it going to start and all that. It was stressful. I get home at the end of the day and I was emotionally stressed out, worrying about my car all day long, and worried about it breaking down, and the seat's uncomfortable, the air conditioning doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. All of that jazz is gone when you're driving a nicer vehicle. So now, by middle of the day, I'm not exhausted like I used to be. It's funny, when I was in my mid-20s, I would end my workday exhausted. Right now, I'm 47, and I end the day feeling refreshed because I'm driving such a nice car. The car's comfortable, all the tech is helpful, the radio's beautiful, the AC works wonderfully, I've got heated seats in the winter, all of that stuff, the autopilot, taking the load off the driving, all that stuff plays in. And the last few service calls of the day, I'm in a better mood, so I'm a better person to have doing service work for my customers in their homes, and I feel better at the end of the day, so I'm a more productive human being in driving a nicer vehicle. Now, that doesn't have to be a Tesla. But I noticed this the first time when I bought my Ford C-Max Hybrid. Heated leather seats and nav and all the tech and voice activated this and that. I mean, that car has a lot of tech in it, especially for a 2013. Wonderful car. That car was so comfortable to drive and such a joy to have that by the end of my day, I felt very good. And I told my wife this. I said, I'm a much better human being at the end of my workday with that car than I ever was before I got it. And she said, I agree with that. So those are some additional things that, operating a vehicle for a business, especially a vehicle that requires a lot of travel, it's different than owning a vehicle for personal use. And I mean, I still would love the Tesla for personal use, but admittedly, it's expensive enough that it would be more difficult to justify. I still, I think, would do it, but at the time I bought this car, I don't think I could have afforded the car for personal use. The business could afford it for a business vehicle, but for personal use, I don't know. Well, at this stage in my life, I could afford it for personal use as well. So maybe when my wife's Ford Fusion all-wheel drive car wears out, maybe we'll look at getting her a Model 3, maybe a certified pre-owned or something, but maybe we'll look at upgrading her to a Model 3. In fact, we probably will at that point. But definitely for business use, this car not only makes sense, but earns me a profit. My YouTube channel brings in anywhere from $600 to $800 per month, and I wouldn't have that revenue if not for owning this car. Shooting the videos does take time, but it's also kind of a hobby that I enjoy. So there's a lot of different things, and I believe for a business, you should look at monetizing everything. So this car transports me to customers' houses, so it allows me to earn money. It saves me money on fuel. I get to write off 50 some cents per mile, and so at 40,000+ miles a year, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that that's $20,000+ deduction on having this car every year. That's way more than it costs me per year. Plus, again, I have my YouTube channel on it, so I have multiple layers of revenue stream that this car brings me. $7,500 tax credit, all of those things that I believe in monetizing everything for a business, and if you can multiple monetize it, all the better. I don't mind having an expensive cell phone because I don't have a secretary, so communications for me is very valuable. So I want a high-end cell phone, or at least a reliable cell phone that I can trust. I buy, good tools, all of this stuff, because it makes my business more profitable, and I can save salaries and save my own time so that I can be generating revenue. For every minute I'm not generating revenue, I'm losing. So I need to maximize my revenue generating time. So I'm not a multimillionaire. I don't have a bunch of employees or whatever. I'm just a one-man entrepreneur. But I've started and run a number of small businesses. I have a rental property, and I love the businessman aspect of owning this car. And in that context, there's nothing like this car for my business. So anyway, way too much talking as usual. If you guys have any questions about the car or about being self-employed, and wow, this thing is too sensitive. Anyway, if you have any questions about the car or about being self-employed or using the car for business or whatever it is, by all means, leave a question in the comments section. I also don't mind giving you guys my email address. I've already met a couple of guys, even one service guy, through having my channel, and I'm more than happy to give out any information that I can. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, guys. Give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and my referral code will be a link in the description below. You guys have yourselves a wonderful day. Take it easy now. Bye-bye.